In 2015, a much bigger company looked at the Battlefront games millions of us grew up on and decided they could do it better. Then charge us a full price to find out. But before that game hit shelves, something else happened. Something that rewrote what Star Wars even was. In 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm for $4 billion, and then they started erasing things. April 2013, LucasArts, the studio that built or published almost every classic Star Wars game, shut down overnight. 150 people lost their jobs. 2 games deep in development, Star Wars 1313 and multiplayer shooter called First Assault, cancelled on the spot. Gone before anyone outside the studio even touched them. A year later, the purge went deeper. April 2014. Lucasfilm announced that 30+ years of Star Wars stories, books, comics and game narratives were no longer canon, all of it rebranded as Legends. Decades of universe building dismissed in a press release. The slate was wiped for the sequels, for new films, for new games that hadn't been made yet. And the gaming license handed exclusively to Electronic Arts, a 10-year deal, every major Star Wars game on every platform, all EA. Their first move was give Battlefront to DICE, the Battlefield studio, large-scale warfare vehicles, squad combat, on paper the perfect fit. What came out the other side was the prettiest Star Wars game anyone had ever seen, and one of the emptiest. October 2015, the open beta dropped. 3 modes: Walker Assault on Hoth, Drop Zone on Seleucid, and Survival Mission on Tatooine. The first thing that overwhelmed me was how beautiful it was. Without exaggeration, this was Lucas' masterpiece on my screen. A real faraway galaxy. Every step, every rifle shot, every blaster bolt, every TIE fighter screaming overhead. The sound design alone could make you forget you were playing a game. It buzzed in your ears and triggered something primal. DICE didn't just render these worlds, they scanned actual movie props from Lucasfilm Vault. Helmets, blaster, costumes, every surface looked real in a way no Star Wars game had managed before. The controls leaned more towards realism, which rubbed me the wrong way. I'm actually an arcade fan at heart. But combined with the visual fidelity, the punch of shooting, the way the environment reacted around you, it was majestic. For about a week. A few weeks of running around in big battles, a few rounds of heroes versus villains on smaller maps, a couple of weeks slicing through bots, and I was done. Completely bored. There was no single player campaign, nothing to fall back on when the multiplayer loop ran dry. And for someone who isn't a hardcore competitive shooter player, it ran dry fast. But this was not only my problems with the game, there was some more. For example, the flying. This needs its own moment because it was genuinely awful on PC. The flight model was so aggressively arcade in the worst sense that PC players couldn't control it with the mouse. The ship just spins. You spin, the enemy spins. You're both locked in an infinite loop of barrel rolls until someone gets bored or throws up on the screen. After 20 minutes in flying mission, I felt motion sick for the first time in my life. No exaggerating. Nausea and dizziness for 2 solid hours afterward. The entire flight experience was an endless attempt to straighten out and find the enemy on screen while they doing the exact thing in reverse. You both trapped in a dizzy spiral going nowhere. The community solution: keep a gamepad next to the keyboard. Ground combat, keyboard and mouse. The second you got in the cockpit, grab the controller. That's how people adapted. Not because the game supported well, because it was the only way to stop wanting to throw up. As for me, after those first 20 minutes, I never touched a starfighter again.
Another happy landing.
And what about a single player campaign? EA basically said, no campaign for you, sucker, get lost. But it's $60, Mr. Krabs! A handful of maps and a $50 season pass on the top that split the player base in half. If you didn't buy it, your matchmaking pool shrank. If you did, you paid over $100 for what the original Battlefront gave you on the one disc. In part 1, where I told you about the classics, I mentioned no microtransaction, Galactic Conquest gave you a wall strategy layer for free, space battles came built in, all on the disc, full package. The 2015 reboot had none of that, no Galactic Conquest, no space battles and launch, no Clone Wars, just the original trilogy, a few gorgeous maps, and a store asking for more money. It sold 14 million copies anyway, because it said Star Wars on the box. It launched next to The Force Awakens, and the players were starving for a high-quality Star Wars game, starving enough to buy an incomplete one at full price. So EA learned a lesson from the backlash. Unfortunately, the wrong one. They heard people want more content and interpreted it as we can sell them more things. Battlefront II 2017 launched with everything that first one was missing: a campaign, Clone Wars era space battles, all three trilogies. On paper, the perfect sequel. But underneath all of it was a system designed to extract money from every single things you did. I didn't get to play the full launch properly. 2017 was a year where I was trying to get my own life on track, sorting through problems, replaying old single-player Star Wars games on the side, but still watching the industry closely. The price of the BF2 was steep, and I didn't have a PC that could run it. But I managed to get into the stress test for a few hours, and what I saw made me sick in a different way than the flight controls of BF1. The card system, the loot boxes, it triggered something between righteous fury and a wall of profanity aimed straight at the developers. I'm not a strong competitive shooter player to begin with, but when you literally cannot compete against someone whose cards are just numerically stronger than yours, not because they're better, but because they paid more, it feels like a cheap pay-to-win mobile game. Sure, at this point I was obviously worse than players who spent more time in the game, but the problem wasn't skill, it was math. I could already see where this was heading long term, not a $60 Star Wars AAA title, a slot machine wearing a Stormtrooper helmet. I couldn't believe how deeply DICE and EA had buried the legacy of the classics, how far they walked in the opposite direction from the first reboot's promise. It was openly greedy, sloppy and ugly. The game looked just as beautiful as before, but behind that beauty sat the same hungry face of EA and their schemes to squeeze every last penny out of the player's pocket. Here's how the system worked. Every hero, every star card upgrade, every meaningful progression item sat inside loot boxes. Earn them slowly through gameplay, or pay real money. Want Darth Vader? 40 hours of grinding, or just open your wallet. This wasn't cosmetic, this was power. Better cards, better stats, stronger abilities. Pay more, win more. In a full price game. Mid-November 2017, a Reddit user complains that Vader is locked behind a wall after paying $80. EA's community team respond. The intent is to provide players with the sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. 683,000 downvotes. A Guinness World Record still holds it. The internet detonated. Gaming outlets, mainstream news, politicians, everyone piled in. Belgium's Gaming Commission opened a formal investigation into whether loot boxes constitute gambling. Hawaii legislator held a press conference calling the game a Star Wars-themed online casino. EA's stock dropped 8.5%, billions in shareholder value gone, just poof. 2 weeks before the official launch, EA ripped the microtransaction out entirely. But here's what nobody actually talks about enough. While the world was on the fire over loot boxes, the actual game sat inside all the noise, wanted to be played, and buried under the controversy was a genuinely good campaign. Inferno Squad. You play as Aiden Versio, commander of the elite Imperial Special Forces unit. Not Rebel, not Jedi, not Force-sensitive hero, Imperial soldier, regular one on the other side. 5 to 7 hours, not long, not a story that leaves deep emotional scars or triggers an existential crisis, but a beautiful, well-crafted ride through the Empire's fall, told from the perspective of people who believed in it. And Aiden herself goes on a real arc. She starts as the true believer, loyal, disciplined, certain that the Empire is right, then watches her own side burns its own people. and has to decide who she actually is. It's not the deepest character study ever written, but it's honest, it's earned, and it lands. That mattered. In a time before TV show Andor, before the wave of the regular people Star Wars stories flooded every medium, this was one of the few times you got to stand on the other side of the war and see it through their eyes. Not Sith Lords, not chosen ones, soldiers who followed orders because they thought they were right, and one soldier was stopped. The campaign was worth playing, and it got overshadowed entirely by loot boxes nobody could stop talking about. Then something strange happened. EA didn't abandon the game. Over the next 2.5 years, DICE shipped 25 free content updates. They rebuilt the entire progression system from scratch, removed loot boxes from progression entirely, added Clone Wars content, Obi-Wan, Grievous, Anakin, Dooku, capital ship battles, co-op modes, new maps, droid deca reinforcements. By 2019, Battlefront 2 was a genuinely good game, maybe even great. The same game that launched as a pay-to-win disaster had quietly transformed into one of the best multiplayer Star Wars experiences available. The Reddit reviews flipped, player counts climbed back, people who sworn off the game returned and found something worth staying for. And then, in April 2020, EA pulled the plug. No more updates. The game was complete? But the community didn't accept that, not even close. Every May 4 Star Wars Day, players organized mass rallies inside the game. They flood the servers, they trend hashtags, they remind EA that Battlefront is not forgotten and they still waiting for a third game. And it goes deeper than protest. The Kyber project, a community-run server system, keeps Battlefront 2 alive with the custom tools, mods and infrastructure that DICE never built. Modders release full overhauls, new heroes, new maps, new modes. These mods require the original game to run, meaning EA still makes money every time someone buys BF2 to access the community content. The game is officially abandoned by its developers. It still generates revenue, because the fans refuse to let it end. So, that's the DICE era. 2 games. The first one was gorgeously and empty, a tech demo dressed as a multiplayer shooter, sold on the strength of the Star Wars name alone. The second was poisoned at birth by corporate greed, redeemed by 2 years of work nobody expected, and then abandoned the moment it was finally worth playing. Neither of them had galactic conquest, neither of them had the soul of the originals, that sandbox chaos, that feeling of a toy box with no rules. The DICE games were prettier, smoother, more cinematic, and less free, more controlled, more interested in extracting value than created it. But the community that grew around the second one, the modders, the rally organizers, the Kyber servers builders, they carry something of old spirit. The same energy that kept the original Battlefront 2 alive through GameSpy shutdown, through a decade of silence. Players who refuse to let a good thing end just because a corporation say it's over. And that's where part 3 picks up, because the story of Battlefront doesn't end with EA's silence. There are chapters most people never saw. 2 PSP spin-offs, Renegade Squadron and Elite Squadron, that tried to keep the original formula alive on a handheld while the main series was frozen. A Battlefront 3 by the original developers, Pandemic's successor at Free Radical, that was reportedly 99% complete before LucasArts axed it. A smaller project called First Assault, a multiplayer shooter meant to be the quiet reboot, the stepping stone back to a full Battlefront buried when Disney bought a Lucasfilm and shut everything down. And then, years later, Aspire's Classic Collection, an attempt to sell our own nostalgia back to us that went about as badly as it possibly could. All of the lost Battlefronts, all the ones that almost existed, and the one that tried to come back and broke on arrival. That's part 3.